Hi, I'm Superbo's Net Hero Podcast, special edition, all about the Big Zero Show. And if you have not registered for your ticket, do so right now. They're still free and they're still available 2nd and 3rd of July. One of the topics we'll be discussing is all about how we get to the full net zero, not just by cutting, but by removing carbon. And can that be something you could do today? Simon, first of all, really glad you're joining us in Coventry for the Big Zero Show. Thank you for that.
Not at all. Glad to be here.
Let's talk about this because the reason you're on is I spoke on the podcast a few months ago to your colleague Jim Mann, and it was very well received, the idea of kind of what you're doing. So in a nutshell, for people who may have not heard the podcast, explain what Undo does and what carbon removal is.
Okay, so Undo is a UK-based project developer, and we implement projects that are all around a particular project type, a carbon removal project type called enhanced rock weathering. And enhanced rock weathering is basically the acceleration of a natural process involving a chemical reaction or several chemical reactions between rain, CO2, and certain types of rock, silicate rock, which results in the removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. It's a process that has been happening for millennia. It's one of the reasons why we have a stable planet today. And the enhanced bit is the fact that we accelerate that process so that that carbon removal is delivered in a meaningful time frame for climate change, i.e. in tens of years rather than tens of thousands of years. And those projects are then taken through various certification processes that result in the generation of carbon removal credits, which are then used by businesses to achieve deliver on their net zero targets.
Most of the people in our audience who are watching this and will be there at the show will have heard of carbon offsetting. And it's kind of one of those things that's had a bit of a mixed reputation. Some people say it's really great and some people say it's just a con. And, I've bought a forest in Patagonia or wherever the hell it is, or in the middle of the Amazon. I've never seen it. I'm boasting that I'm so green because I've planted a few yucca trees, but no one's got any proof of it. Where do you see this new field of carbon removal? And is it offsetting? Because that's something I think a lot of people want to know. Is this just another kind of offsetting?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The carbon offsetting world didn't do itself many favors in the early years.
Yeah.
There was a lot of gaming of the system. There was a lot of project failure. There were a lot of sort of misinformed and misaligned claims associated with what had been achieved from a carbon perspective and what was actually happening on the ground. And so that gave carbon offsetting kind of 101 a poor reputation, and deservedly so. So the carbon removals is, I guess, a kind of a new take on, it is a type of offsetting. However, it delivers a different function from a carbon perspective. So I'll just quickly explain that. What that basically means is that, so the old carbon offsetting projects, and you talked about, yucca plants in Patagonia or let's say renewable energy projects, around the world. What they basically do from a carbon perspective is that project sort of slows down the amount of carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere by simply sort of avoiding or reducing CO2 production. But it doesn't actually, CO2 is still going into the atmosphere. What carbon removal does is there are now a handful of technologies, some better known than others, which actually remove CO2 from the atmosphere. So, and that is, a very, very distinct and important difference between the two. Now, you can't get to net zero without utilizing carbon removal in some way, because after a company is decarbonized to the point that you can't do anything else unless you're literally standing still with the lights off. You have to produce some carbon in the atmosphere, right, to operate. And then that carbon footprint has to be neutralized or removed from the atmosphere through the utilization of carbon removal credits or projects. And so that's the only way any company is going to get to net zero. And so that's why organizations on this journey have to engage with carbon removal, and sooner rather than later. Otherwise, they're going to have problems. And so that's what carbon removal is. And then at the same time, in recognition of this sort of, upcoming spike in demand for this type of carbon management, if you like. I don't really like to use offsetting anymore because it's kind of
exactly for that reason. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got a bad reputation. now a very sort of significant movement around trying to sort of deliver or grow this sector with a kind of integrity and credibility that the previous offsetting sector didn't have. I mean, it is still a voluntary sector.
Of course,
It
yeah.
isn't regulated, but there are now very sort of stringent guidelines in place by very reputable and credible organizations that ensure that this sector is going to grow with the kind of credibility, integrity that it didn't have previously. And so I think companies getting involved into this, lean on those guidelines heavily, understand how they work, and make sure any projects that they're considering purchasing credits for meet these very strict integrity or credit, eligibility criteria.
The companies who come to the Big Zero Show, the people who come to the Big Zero Show are like you and me. They work for companies that are big and small. Some are local authorities, public sectors, where money is very tight. Others are obviously big corporates. Do you see this new field of carbon removal almost something that could become universal, or are there a lot of cost barriers? Because that's the thing that, which is still reeling from the effects of the pandemic and then the energy crisis from Ukraine. And a lot of the energy end users will be going, I want to do something, but I haven't got the capital to do these things. Do you believe that this kind of new technology, and it is a new field, as you say, but this carbon removal field could be something that we can all get involved with? And is that the message you put to the businesses who attend?
Carbon removal still exists within the voluntary carbon market. And as long as participation is voluntary, then whether you do it or not will be informed by decision-making criteria, which are quite personal to the organization or the individual.
Sure.
And prices and prices are biggie, right? And notwithstanding what what the individual situation is, how cash rich the organization may be, and therefore their ability to afford to purchase carbon removal credits. I mean, let's be honest, carbon removal credits at the moment are much more expensive than traditional offset credits. If you want to buy a ton of CO2 CDR, carbon dioxide removal, from a DAX plant, for example, it's going to cost you in the region of 600 quid. So it's much more expensive. Those costs are going to come down over time as these project types scale up. So as long as it's voluntary, then it's subject to a decision-making process, which is, individual to the organization. But that won't always be the case. There is a clear pathway now towards bringing, and I'm going to say CDR, which is carbon dioxide removal, right? That brings CDR into the compliance markets. And at that point, companies will not have a choice as to whether they participate or not in this particular sector. And those organizations affected by, compliance markets will have to use carbon removals in some capacity.
Would you believe that, this will be one of those things that it's a technology that's quite nascent. And as you said, there are several different kinds, direct air capture. There's a few various kinds out there. But do you think that this is going to become something over the next sort of 5 to 10 years that companies kind of understand? The same as we understand waste removal, or we understand, changing our lights to LEDs. Do you eventually hope that when we run a business in the next kind of decade or so, we'll be doing profit, loss, and how are we doing with our carbon removal?
Yes, absolutely. And there will be some businesses who will choose to get into it early because it's an important part of their brand and their sort of, their belief system. And there are other businesses that will simply wait until they have to do it. And that'll be the majority of businesses. And so as soon as you are in an environment as a business where you're having to report on your carbon footprint, your decarbonisation program, maybe you've signed up to a net zero target through the Science Based Target Initiative. As soon as you have to do this stuff, then you're going to learn about it, right? You're going to put somebody onto it and say, right, we need to know what this carbon removal business is all about and how we should interact with it in order to comply with these new regulations that we've just signed up to or are being imposed on us by the various sort of regulatory bodies.
I suppose the thing is, as we come to the end of this chat, that really, as businesses operate, as you said right at the beginning, we're still going to produce carbon. Do you believe that the removal world, and let's just not just, talk about your technology, but the world of removal will start to play a major role so that people will start to go, yeah, do you know what? I can rely on it. Generally, it's local, which I think is a very big thing for people, that it can happen here in the UK if you're based in the UK or wherever you're based. and that it is a credible way, as you say, eventually as a market developer. Do you think that is where it'll go? Because I get it. I get it quite easily. And I think most people will understand, isn't it better to take away as you're operating and maybe able to take away more than what you produce? But people still aren't sure about the science of these things. And of course, most people haven't probably heard about it yet.
Yeah, of course. So I think it is an inevitability that organizations are going to learn about, fully engage with, and participate in carbon removals. Is as long as you are either voluntarily or being forced down a net zero pathway, the only way to get there is to use carbon removals. So that is a sort of inevitable end game that you're coming up against. I mean, I would say to any organization that's on that pathway or even considering that pathway, engage with carbon removals now. It's a bit more complicated.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
project types are different to the ones that you might sort of be associated with in terms of offsetting. And also, and this is the most important point, if you sit in your hands busily decarbonising and wait till 20, let's say your net zero target's 2030, and on the sort of midsummer 2029 think, okay, let's get some carbon removal sorted because we're going to need these next year.
Yeah.
There won't be any in the marketplace, and there won't be supply will be a major issue. And so organizations have to engage with this now and either begin to fund projects to securitize supply because when they need them, or simply engage in the process and understand as to how they're going to purchase and utilize carbon removals for when they're actually going to need them. If you wait until 2030 or 2040, you're going to get a nasty surprise, and you'll fail to meet your target. So the call to action is just get involved now and begin to learn about it.
Well, Simon, I'm sure you'll have a fascinating talk for our audience and given the 101 and all of this stuff.
Great stuff. Well, thank you very much for inviting me on the podcast. And yeah, I can't wait to come up to Coventry and speak about ERW to the audience.
Brilliant. Get your tickets now for the Big Zero show. Simon will be there. It is, I think, one of the major routes to help businesses to decarbonize. It's a fascinating world. As he said, get to understand it more. Join us at the Big Show. Simon, I'll see you in July. Thanks a lot for your time.
See you then.
You've just heard the Net Hero podcast from FutureNetZero.com. Join us as we help you find ways to cut your carbon footprint as we head towards net zero. Subscribe and follow us on social media. FutureNetZero.com. Better business, better planet.